On August 3, 2019, a family's trip to Cedar Creek Amusement Park in Ohio seemed like the perfect opportunity to escape from the stress of everyday life. For Helen Walker, a 34-year-old high school teacher recently divorced, the day was meant to be a fresh start. She brought along her sister Evie Jennings, a 31-year-old freelance graphic designer, and Evie's son, Tyler Jennings, a 9-year-old with a quiet, observant nature and a passion for engineering. The family was ready to spend the day together, enjoying the rides, food, and fun the park had to offer. The morning passed like any other day at the park, filled with laughter, bright colors, and the promise of new memories. The family rode the coasters, took pictures, and even shared a meal. There was no sign that anything was out of place. But by 3:34 p.m., everything changed. Helen Walker, a mother and sister, was no longer seen with her family. Evie and Tyler walked toward the Breakwater Cafe, but Helen was nowhere in sight. By the time they reached the cafe, it was clear that something had gone wrong. Helen was missing. A sense of unease began to settle over the family. The investigation would soon reveal unsettling details, ones that no one could have predicted. What started as an ordinary day would become a chilling mystery. The police were called, and the search began immediately. But no one could explain how or why Helen had vanished. Was it a misunderstanding, or had something more troubling occurred? What followed was an investigation that would draw public attention and challenge investigators every step of the way. As the days passed, the search for Helen would deepen, revealing not just the mystery of her disappearance, but secrets from the past, secrets no one was prepared to face. This is the story of what happened to the Walker family, how their lives were turned upside down, and the truth that would eventually come to light. It was a day that began like any other for the Walker family, nothing to hint at the tragedy that would unfold. The weather was perfect, the rides exhilarating, and the laughter of children filled the air. Helen Walker had planned this trip for her nephew Tyler and her sister Evie Jennings to escape the weight of recent personal struggles. They were at Cedar Creek Amusement Park in Ohio, a place meant to create new memories and leave the troubles of the world behind. For a few hours, it seemed like everything was in place. They rode the roller coasters. They shared a meal at one of the park's outdoor eateries. There were smiles, photos, and a sense of camaraderie between them. The day was unremarkable in its normality, yet it would mark the beginning of something that would haunt the family forever. By 3:34 p.m., the family was last seen together near the Ferris wheel. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the park. It wasn't a particularly special moment, but it was the last one shared by the family before everything changed. Evie and Tyler were seen walking toward the Breakwater Cafe a few minutes later, just before 3:58 p.m. But Helen, the mother figure and sister, was nowhere to be found. At first it seemed like she had stepped away, perhaps to grab a drink or visit the restroom. But as time passed, it became evident that something was wrong. She wasn't where she was expected to be, and there was no sign of her. Evie, realizing Helen was missing, began calling her name. No response. After several attempts, she checked the spots she assumed Helen would have been. Still, nothing. Panic started to settle in. This wasn't just a casual disappearance. The family was about to be thrust into a nightmare. The park, usually bustling with visitors, now felt empty, almost suffocating. Security footage reviewed later showed no signs of Helen Walker leaving the park through any exit. There was no trace. Her car, parked in lot G14, remained untouched. Tyler's backpack and Helen's purse were still inside the vehicle, but there were no signs of a struggle. No broken windows, no chaos. Just quiet, empty space. The police were called, and the investigation began immediately. The authorities had little to go on at first, but one detail stood out: a family missing from a heavily monitored, well-staffed location. This wasn't just an odd occurrence. It was the beginning of a mystery that would defy explanation. Law enforcement arrived at the scene within an hour, securing the park and starting their search. The authorities were quick to analyze the security footage, but it only raised more questions. The family had been enjoying their day, but suddenly, Helen was gone. A detailed search of the park ensued, with K9 units dispatched to trace her scent. The dogs followed the scent trail from the Ferris wheel, through the midway, toward the Breakwater Cafe. And then, nothing. The trail ended at a service entrance of the cafe, but it didn't continue. A thorough inspection of the car brought an unsettling discovery. Helen's purse, containing her wallet and phone, was still in the front passenger seat. Tyler's backpack, a child's bag filled with basic essentials, was in the back. But there were no signs of a struggle. It was as if Helen had vanished. No physical evidence, no chaos, just absence. The search efforts were intensified. Investigators began questioning park employees, checking surveillance footage, and speaking with witnesses. Yet there was no indication of where Helen had gone. The case became even more perplexing when it was revealed that Helen's phone was never found. It remained turned off. The family had no answers, and neither did the police. The unsettling part of the situation was the lack of physical evidence. This wasn't a typical missing persons case. It wasn't a simple misunderstanding. A mother figure, sister and aunt, had vanished without a trace, and the family was left to wrestle with a grim reality. Something far more complex was unfolding, and no one could explain why or how it had happened. By late afternoon, park security handed control to local law enforcement. Command set a tight perimeter around the midway and routed foot traffic away from the Ferris wheel corridor. Time mattered. The goal was simple: establish a clean timeline and trace movement, step by step. K9 teams were deployed first. Handlers started at the last confirmed location near the Ferris wheel. The dogs locked onto a joint scent for Helen Walker, her sister Evie Jennings, and her nephew Tyler Jennings. The trail moved north through the midway, past concession stands, and into a quieter zone of the park. Each turn was logged. Each intersecting path was flagged for camera pulls. The scent drew straight to the Breakwater Cafe. Cameras above the main entrance showed steady crowds and routine staff rotations. Inside, officers walked the same path the dogs indicated, through the dining area, past a service counter, toward a back-of-house corridor. The dogs pulled harder near a steel service door used by staff. When the door was opened onto a narrow access lane, the momentum ended. No drift left, no drift right. On the pavement just outside that threshold, the scent collapsed. Handlers reported a hard stop at that point. Investigators noted it in the log and mapped it over camera coverage. That stop raised immediate questions. The access lane ran parallel to the lakeshore and connected to limited-use gates for deliveries. It was less crowded, poorly visible from guest areas, and lined with utility fixtures that created blind spots for older cameras. Detectives ordered a full pull of every camera covering the cafe's rear corridor, the door itself, and the access road. They also requested staff lists and delivery logs for the afternoon window. At the same time, a separate team rechecked the Walker vehicle. The car remained locked in lot G14. Helen's purse was on the front seat. Tyler's backpack was in the back. The glass was intact. No forced entry. No scattered belongings. Officers photographed the interior, tagged the items, and returned them to the vehicle pending a warrant for full processing. The absence of movement, no exit swipe, no gate record, no vehicle departure, kept the focus inside the park's footprint. Witness canvassing began at 5-minute radius intervals from the cafe. Staff at the Breakwater reported no disturbance around the time Evie and Tyler were seen heading that way. A busser recalled 2 adults and a child passing quickly toward the rear corridor but could not confirm faces. Detectives documented it as unverified. Teams moved table to table, then out to the lake path. Near the shoreline north of the cafe, ground units fanned out. The area included a strip of grass, scattered benches, and large boulders placed as wave breaks. Searchers worked grids. They marked bottle caps, ticket stubs, and stray napkins as routine litter. Then a tech flagged a small, water-damaged notebook tucked against the rocks. The notebook belonged to Tyler. Inside were tight mechanical sketches, gears, coaster track segments, and elevation notes. Near the back, a page stood out. It showed a 32-foot cabin cruiser with white hull and blue accent lines. Tyler had labeled proportions, marked the position of a radar arch, and penciled a partial name: Mariner as Rest. In the corner, he wrote a time, 4:10 p.m., and the date, August 3rd. Even with water exposure, the graphite remained legible. Evidence techs photographed the notebook in place, lifted it with gloved hands, and secured it in a paper evidence bag for drying and later analysis. Chain of custody was logged. The shoreline grid expanded 50 yards in both directions to search for complementary items. None were found. The find was briefed to command within minutes. That drawing changed the pace. A boat reference shifted attention from a closed loop inside the park to the waterline bordering it. Detectives requested marina camera pulls, maintenance dock footage, and any boat traffic records captured by nearby facilities. They also began a name query: Mariner as Rest, in variations, cross-referenced with local and state boat registrations for vessels in the 30-34-foot range with white and blue profiles. Back at the cafe, technicians checked the service door hardware and surrounding surfaces. The door's alarm had been disabled for a short window earlier in the day for a scheduled delivery. Documentation confirmed a vendor entry and exit, both time-stamped. Investigators compared those timestamps to the K9 route. The times did not align perfectly, but the overlap was close enough to keep the corridor as a high-interest zone. A list of delivery drivers and service staff on shift was compiled for interviews. Phone activity was reviewed next. Subpoenas went out for call detail records associated with Helen and Evie. Initial returns indicated no outgoing calls from Helen during the window in question. Evie's calls clustered after 4 p.m., consistent with attempts to reach Helen once she realized they were separated. Tyler's basic phone, left in the vehicle, offered no movement data. Geofenced pings were requested from carriers for the cafe corridor and access lane, seeking any dense clusters around 3:45 to 4:15 p.m. As the notebook underwent drying and high-resolution scanning, analysts enhanced the boat sketch. The angle of the bow, the placement of the cabin windows, and the line of the waterline stripe were compared against manufacturer catalogs and common models kept by state wildlife agencies. The partial name was tested against a registration database using wildcard searches. Mariner sent Rest. Mariner's Rest. Mariner's Rest. A working list of candidate boats was compiled with owners' names, home ports, and known mooring locations along Lake Erie's south shore. Detectives returned to the shoreline where the notebook was found and walked the sightline Tyler would likely have had. From that vantage, the lake widened with a clear view toward small craft lanes. If a child intent on detail had paused to draw, he would have had a direct line to vessels idle near the rocks or moving slowly within view. The time on the page, 4:10 p.m., was now a key reference. Analysts synced it with any available external cameras facing the water, including private feeds from nearby concessions and maintenance posts. Interviews continued into the evening. A concession worker stationed near the lake path recalled a boy seated on a bench, sketching with unusual focus around the 4 o'clock hour. The worker did not recall the adults with him, but placed the boy near the very spot where the notebook surfaced. The statement was documented. No other witnesses provided boat names, but several noted a white and blue cruiser idling offshore earlier that afternoon. Parallel teams kept pressure on the service corridor angle. Badge logs, delivery windows, and staff rotations were mapped against the K9 route. A request went out for older camera files that might fill blind spots. Sometimes retired feeds were archived even if not actively monitored. Forensics prepared to dust the service door and push plate once the warrant cleared, though the high-traffic nature of the door meant any touch evidence might be mixed. By nightfall, the investigation had 2 anchors: the scent trail to a controlled access door and a child's detailed drawing of a specific vessel at a specific time. Neither element provided cause by itself. Together, they redirected the search from open park avenues to a narrow corridor and the adjacent waterfront. The working theory shifted from a simple separation in a crowd to a movement toward the lake under unclear circumstances. The next steps were clear: verify every candidate boat, pull all adjacent water-facing footage, interview delivery and cafe staff from the full afternoon roster, and tighten the timeline around 3:58 to 4:15 p.m. The effort remained fact-first. No assumptions without support. Each lead would be tested against cameras, logs, and the physical map of the park. As investigators continued to sift through the growing pool of evidence, a breakthrough came when the name Mariner's Rest, the boat Tyler had sketched in his notebook, was connected to a local businessman named Travis Brooks. Brooks, a man known in the area for his work in property management, had been a distant acquaintance of Helen's ex-husband. At first, the connection seemed minor, a name in a few old family photos. But the more authorities looked into Brooks's background, the more unsettling the picture became. Travis Brooks was a man of many layers, outwardly successful but with a dark past that investigators were just beginning to uncover. Brooks had a criminal record, including a history of financial crimes dating back several years. Though not immediately violent, his past raised red flags. He had been involved in a series of questionable business dealings and had been investigated in the past for harassment and intimidation related to a previous relationship. But it was his association with Helen's family that would become the key to understanding this case. Brooks had known Helen's ex-husband, and they had shared a professional relationship over the years. What appeared to be a casual connection between old business associates soon became a tangled web of unsettling details. Investigators discovered that Helen's ex-husband had, at one point, been in financial turmoil and had sought Brooks's help during a difficult time. Brooks, ever the fixer, had stepped in with loans, but the terms had not been entirely clear. Helen, not long after, had severed ties with Brooks, and there were whispers that she had grown wary of him. The connection between Brooks and Helen's family was deeper than just business. There were reports of late-night phone calls, and when pressed, some family members hinted at unease, but there had never been enough to take any legal action, until now. Investigators began to see a pattern. Brooks's behavior, once ignored, began to appear less coincidental and more strategic. As the investigation moved forward, the more authorities learned about Brooks's background, the clearer it became that he had a personal stake in Helen's life and her family's dynamics. His interest in Helen seemed to go beyond professional, though no one had ever connected the dots before. He was a man who lived in the shadows unnoticed by most, but his involvement was anything but accidental. A background check into Brooks's personal life revealed that he had been obsessively tracking Helen's movements. Brooks had kept a close watch on her post-divorce life, and his unsettling interest had grown stronger in the months leading up to her disappearance. Several people close to the family confirmed that Helen had expressed concerns about Brooks's behavior and had made it clear that she felt uneasy around him. Suspicion among the investigators grew. Brooks's connection to the boat was more than coincidental. Not only had Brooks owned Mariner's Rest, but it turned out he had spent the afternoon before the disappearance docked near the lake, just off the park's shoreline. It wasn't long before investigators realized that Brooks had direct access to the water surrounding the park and had used his boat as a means of escape, should things go wrong. The deeper investigators dug, the more alarming his ties to the case became. His boat, the one Tyler had drawn, was registered to him, but the dock it was tied to wasn't far from where Helen had been last seen. It seemed like the more they uncovered about Brooks, the more intertwined he became with the very core of the mystery. As more details about Brooks's past and his interactions with Helen's family were uncovered, the investigation team began to form a chilling picture of what had occurred. It wasn't just a chance encounter that led to Helen's disappearance. This was the result of a deliberate pattern, a pattern that pointed back to Brooks, whose obsession with Helen had festered over time. The once friendly acquaintance had turned into something far more troubling. As the investigation continued into the past of Travis Brooks, a chilling revelation emerged that would forever alter the trajectory of the case. Brooks's father, Ronald Brooks, a former maintenance supervisor at Cedar Creek Amusement Park, was an unexpected figure in the puzzle. A thorough search of the Brooks family's home uncovered Ronald's personal journal, which had been kept for years. Flipping through the pages, investigators came across an entry that sent shockwaves through the team. It read, Travis has done something terrible. God forgive us. The entry, written in Ronald's distinct handwriting, hinted at an unknown, ominous event tied to Travis Brooks, the very same man suspected of being involved in Helen Walker's disappearance. The chilling implication in the journal led investigators to believe that Travis was not just a random figure in the case, but someone with a much deeper, more troubling connection to the tragedy. It wasn't just the journal that provided the breakthrough. With new urgency, investigators shifted their focus to Mariner's Rest, the boat tied to Travis Brooks. Authorities had already known that Brooks owned the boat, but now the investigation took a sharper turn. The boat, docked on Lake Erie, had been unaccounted for during the critical hours of the disappearance. Police obtained a warrant to search the vessel. Inside Mariner's Rest, investigators discovered Helen Walker's purse, Tyler's sneakers, and Evie's camera. The items were unmistakable, and their presence in such a secluded location suggested foul play. Further examination revealed something even more troubling: biological evidence, later confirmed through DNA testing to match Helen. The presence of the purse, the sneakers, and the forensic evidence formed a damning connection. Travis Brooks was no longer just a person of interest. He was directly tied to the disappearance of the Walker family. The evidence stacked against Brooks continued to mount. The boat, once thought to be an innocent link to the investigation, now felt like the key to understanding the mystery. It wasn't just a matter of coincidence. The discovery solidified the theory that Travis Brooks had played a central role in what had happened to Helen and her family. This new information breathed life into the investigation, which had stalled in the days prior. The forensic evidence on the boat, paired with the personal items found there, gave investigators the momentum they needed to move forward. They now had clear, physical evidence linking Brooks to the crime scene, and the psychological weight of the journal's entry added a haunting layer to the growing case against him. What had happened on that afternoon was no longer a mystery. It was clear that Travis Brooks had been involved in Helen's disappearance, but why? What had driven him to this point? With the discovery of the forensic evidence and the journal, the investigation took a darker turn. The search for answers intensified as detectives worked to understand the full scope of Brooks's involvement. Was this a crime of passion? Or was it part of something far more calculated and twisted? Each new piece of evidence added more questions than answers, and the team was left scrambling to piece together the puzzle. The investigation had moved quickly from theory to suspicion, and now it was time for action. Travis Brooks had been elusive, slipping through the cracks, until a nationwide manhunt was launched. Authorities pieced together his movements using phone records, sightings from the public, and tips from informants. Every piece of evidence led them closer to the small, isolated Kelly's Island, just off the coast of Lake Erie. By the time law enforcement arrived, Brooks had been hiding there, evading capture for days. When they finally located him, he surrendered without resistance. It was almost as though the man who had eluded capture for so long knew his time had come. His arrest was quiet, unremarkable in its simplicity. There were no dramatic confrontations or escapes, just the slow, inevitable end to a long search. He was taken into custody and brought back to Ohio, where authorities would begin the difficult task of building the case that would hopefully bring closure to the Walker family. The arrest marked the beginning of a new chapter in the case. Investigators now had Travis Brooks in custody, but questions remained. Why had he done this? What had motivated him? And more importantly, how deep did his obsession run? As the case made its way to court, the tension was intense. Travis Brooks was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping and related offenses. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution was prepared. They presented a detailed timeline of events, piecing together the clues that had led to Helen Walker's disappearance. From the moment Tyler's sketchbook was found with the drawing of Mariner's Rest, to the discovery of Helen's purse and Tyler's sneakers on the boat, every detail painted a picture of a man whose obsession with Helen had escalated to terrifying lengths. Throughout the trial, shocking details about Brooks's behavior were revealed. It wasn't just a random act of violence. It was the culmination of years of creeping obsession. Testimonies from family and friends revealed that Brooks had been tracking Helen's movements, even after she had ended her dealings with him. The prosecution argued that Brooks had carefully planned his actions, targeting Helen because of his fixation on her. Investigators uncovered messages that Brooks had sent to Helen's ex-husband, in which he seemed to express his growing frustrations and obsession with her. As the trial progressed, the psychological profile of Travis Brooks emerged. He had gone from being a distant family acquaintance to someone who had calculated every move to get close to Helen, even after her divorce. The evidence against him was clear, and the courtroom was filled with a sense of mounting tension as Brooks's role in the disappearance came into sharper focus. His actions were not those of a man who had made a rash decision, but rather someone who had carefully considered and executed a plan. After days of testimony, the trial reached its climax. The jury deliberated briefly before returning with a verdict. Travis Brooks was guilty on all charges. The courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to sentence him. There would be no second chances for Brooks. The crime had been calculated, and the damage done to the Walker family was immeasurable. Brooks was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The weight of the sentence was a small measure of justice for Helen and her family, though it could never undo the trauma or the heartache that would linger for the rest of their lives. The verdict was met with mixed emotions from those in the courtroom. For the Walkers, it was the end of a long, painful chapter. But it was not a perfect resolution. The wounds of what had happened would never fully heal. The search for the Walker family had stretched over days, but on August 14th, a tip led authorities to Kelly's Island, a secluded area away from the bustling park. There, Helen, Evie, and Tyler were found alive. The news stunned both the public and law enforcement. The family, who had been missing for 11 days, had somehow survived the unthinkable. Physically, they were weakened and disoriented, but their survival was nothing short of miraculous. They had endured harsh conditions, facing emotional and physical tolls that would leave a lasting impact. The psychological scars, however, were just as severe. Each member of the family had faced extreme trauma, separated, isolated, and living through an ordeal no one should ever endure. The rescue came after days of relentless searching, with their survival against the odds marking a testament to their resilience. Helen clung to her determination to reunite with her family, while Evie protected her son in ways that only a mother could. The moments of kindness and quiet courage in those long days helped them hold on. Despite the darkness of their ordeal, they emerged from the situation alive, and with a sense of disbelief and gratitude. In the wake of the Walker family's rescue, the legal and social consequences began to unfold. The case highlighted a severe gap in stalking and safety regulations that allowed someone like Travis Brooks to evade detection and control the situation for so long. In response to the case, a new law was passed in Ohio, Tyler's Law, named after Tyler Jennings. This law strengthened stalking regulations across the state, ensuring stricter monitoring of individuals with a history of harassment and obsessive behavior. It also mandated increased security at public venues, especially places like amusement parks where large crowds gathered. Tyler's Law was a direct result of the security failures surrounding Travis Brooks's actions, and it aimed to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. The law focused not only on tracking stalkers, but also on creating safe spaces for victims and their families. The Walker family's story led to a change in policy that would have far-reaching implications, beyond just Ohio, to ensure public safety in public spaces. The case of the Walker family was officially closed, but its impact would linger long after. The Breakwater Cafe, where Helen was last seen, was demolished, making way for a memorial garden in honor of the family's suffering and survival. It served as a public recognition of the trauma they endured and a symbol of resilience and healing. The Walker family began their journey of recovery in their own ways. Helen took a sabbatical from her teaching job, focusing on therapy and reconnecting with those closest to her. Evie used her ordeal to become a vocal advocate for stalking victims, working tirelessly to raise awareness of the dangers lurking in everyday life. As for Tyler, the young boy who had drawn the boat that ultimately helped bring his family back. He found solace in his drawing. Once fixated on coasters and mechanical designs, his sketches began to center around safe spaces, playgrounds, and places where children could feel protected and secure. It was his way of reclaiming some of the innocence that had been stolen from him. Though their lives would never return to what they had been before, the Walker family had begun to rebuild. The strength and resilience they showed were testament to the human spirit, and in the face of overwhelming odds, they had not only survived, but were now finding ways to move forward. The case may be closed, but the legacy of the Walker family continues to impact how we think about safety, vigilance, and the importance of listening when someone says they feel unsafe.